Hello, everybody. I'm David Cash. I'm the Dean of the John W. McCormick Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies at UMass Boston. It is a pleasure to be here for the conversation that we're all about to participate in. And it's a pleasure to be collaborating with Living on Earth, Steve and Jay and Jenny, fantastic team to be working with on these series where we explore cutting edge books that really take their place in thought leadership on these important issues. It's fantastic today. In particular, the book All We Can Save, I think, is a monument to a perspective that's long been kept in the shadows or not heard at all, and that is the perspective of women's voices in the issues of climate change and energy and justice. And this book really lifts them up in a way that I think is profound and fantastic. And I want to play my small role in this. I listened to Katharine Wilkinson and Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, the editors of this book, in a conversation with Emily Atkin called Three Climate Feminists Walk Into a Bar. And at the end, they were hoping that climate dudes would champion this book. So that's what I'm doing. This is a fantastic book, and everyone should read this book. And just phenomenal different perspectives on climate and energy and justice and gender in ways that we just haven't heard before. And I will in a moment introduce Rebecca Hurst, who's the director of our Sustainable Solutions Lab. But I just want to make one note. I'm really excited that Susanne Moser, Susie Moser, is speaking tonight. She and I go back a long way. We shared offices when she was a postdoc and I was a graduate student. And as you can tell when you read her writings, there is so much to learn from her, as I did, 20 plus years ago. And so, Susie, it's just an honor to have you participating in this. To continue launching this discussion, Rebecca Hurst is the director of our Sustainable Solutions Lab. It's a cutting edge research and action institute at UMass Boston and focusing on the intersection of climate and equity. And Rebecca has done, continues to do, and will be a remarkable leader in this field and on the UMass Boston campus and in ways that we connect with the community outside of the campus in Boston, in the Massachusetts and beyond. So Rebecca.
Thanks, David. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Rebecca Hurst. I'm the director of the Sustainable Solutions Lab at UMass Boston. The Sustainable Solutions Lab, or SISL, as we like to call it, is a research institute focused on understanding the disproportionate impacts of climate change on historically marginalized communities and working with them to develop sustainable and equitable solutions. Most of our focus is on climate justice and climate resilience. We're working to ensure that efforts that address the climate crisis don't amplify inequities that already exist, but instead take responsibility for past policy decisions that have advantaged some and put others in harm's way, and make sure that everyone can thrive in our changing climate. You can learn more about our research and sign up for our email list at umb.edu/SSL. I'd like to start off tonight with a land acknowledgement. While I know people are zooming in from all over the country, I am currently on the traditional homelands of the Massachusetts people, who are the traditional stewards of this place and are still with us today. I'd also like to acknowledge their near neighbors, the Nipmuc and Wampanoag peoples. If you're interested in learning more about the people who stewarded the land you're currently on for generations, you can visit the link that I'm going to put into the chat. So I'm so excited to be here with all of you tonight. As we think about the enormity of the climate crisis, it is easy to be overwhelmed and not know where to start, or feel like our contributions aren't adding up to change fast enough. But as our speakers tonight will attest, to change everything, we need everyone. And moving forward is so much easier when we do it together. One of the things I found most powerful about these essays is the clear-eyed assessment of how scary our reality is, paired with a commitment to keep showing up. I loved Marianne Heglar, one of the contributors' questions. What if we've been doing the equation backward? What if hope isn't what leads to action? What if courage leads to action and hope is what comes next? And for me, hearing stories from people I admire helps me be courageous. The speakers tonight are incredible, powerful climate adaptation leaders who are shaping the future. I've been following each of their work for a number of years, and I'm so honored to share the stage with them tonight. I'm looking forward to hearing their wisdom as individuals and hearing them in conversation with one another. But before we get to that, I wanted to put in a quick plug. All We Can Save is more than just a book. It's an invitation to find your place at the table and as part of the solution. One way the editors are facilitating that is through All We Can Save circles. Each week, these reading groups go through a new section of the book and meet to discuss questions that Katharine and Ayanna sent us. I will be facilitating a circle that will start in the next few weeks. If you'd like to join us, please email ssl@umb.edu for more information. I'm really looking forward to digging into this material in community. So now it's time to get started. Back in August, when I heard this anthology was coming, I emailed Jay Feinstein, one of Living on Earth's associate producers, to see if they'd be interested in partnering on an event. They were, and here we are. Living on Earth is a nationally syndicated weekly environmental news and information program distributed by PRX. Steve Curwood is the executive producer and host of Living on Earth. They publish shows on all sorts of topics related to climate change, ecology, public health, every week, both on the radio and as a podcast. So be sure to check them out after this program if you haven't already. So I'm so pleased to be partnering with them on this event. Take it away, Steve.
All right, I will when I'm allowed to start my video. Okay, I guess now it will. Okay, terrific. Hey, thank you, Rebecca and David Cash, for such a generous and thoughtful introduction. You know, funny thing is, today at the Living on Earth editorial meeting, we were talking about what gifts might we recommend to people to help celebrate the holiday. And one of the books that came up was All We Can Save. Now, this isn't exactly sort of light, beachfront reading for somebody come the summer, but this collection of essays is just so powerful. We have done 9 Living on Earth book events this year, and this is our last. 2020 is about to end, and I suspect a number of us have a sense of relief about that. So there'll be more, but it'll be in next year. And so I hope you can sign up for our newsletter. It's at loe.org to find out about these book club events, which are going to be coming your way. But, you know, looks like we've been through the election. Well, for the most part, there are things going on as we speak still in Georgia, but seems like we have a vaccine now on the horizon, and can maybe see that the pandemic could get knocked down, but the climate crisis has just kept on moving. It moves slowly, very slowly, kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen a large grizzly bear in the wild. They don't look all that fast. They just seem to be lumbering along, but they are relentless and pretty much unstoppable for anything human. The climate just keeps on moving in the same way. And just because we've been so distracted by these other things and living through the health crisis, the democracy crisis, the problem that the racial underbelly of America that got exposed in such a vivid way this year, the climate crisis is still with us. And one of the most interesting things about the climate crisis that I've learned from the health crisis is that the role of women, like in so many other places, is consistently underestimated. Just think about this. In the virus situation, 3 of the countries that have some of the best records with dealing with this are run by, yeah, you guessed it, women. Thinking of New Zealand, Finland, I'm thinking of Germany. Each of those countries has taken what's been the hand that's been dealt to them and wound up with way lower death rates than other places. So there's not enough time actually to do justice to this book. So my advice is scribble it down, this name down, All We Can Save, Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis. Get yourself a copy or whatever, and start picking through these 41 essays. Do I have that number right? I think it's 41. Because this really does offer us some amazing insights. And to share with us a little bit of the work that they did in this process is Colette Pichon Battle. Let me see if I can find her picture here. Colette, can I see you? Are you there? There we go. All right. She's a human rights attorney and co-chair of the Gulf South for a Green New Deal. Jainey Bavishi is, Jainey, you here? She's leading New York City's efforts to prepare for the impacts of climate change. Like Boston, New York is right there at sea level. Thank you, by the way, New York. Superstorm Sandy, if the tides had been running, 6 hours difference, 7 hours difference, we would have gotten to share that experience with you in a much more intimate way. Also with us is Susanne Moser. Susie, I guess people like to call you Susie. She's a social science researcher, writer, and speaker with a focus on climate adaptation. And of course, the editor is Colette Wilkinson, co-editor with Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. Hi there, Katharine. So maybe you would start us off, Katharine, on this matter of gender. Your anthologies, all these pieces are by women, or people identify as women, I should say. What significance does that hold for you? And I'm going to ask the others of you as well.
Thanks so much, Steve. It's really wonderful to be with you all. So the climate crisis is not gender neutral, right? It has been born out of a gender unjust system, not only gender unjust, but certainly that is one dimension. It is not gender neutral in its impacts. It heightens existing vulnerabilities and injustices, and it needs to be gender equal in its solutions. And that is really what this book is about. It is about recognizing that the climate crisis is a leadership crisis, and the leadership of the status quo is not getting the job done. And there are so many incredible women who are showing up to do this work, and far too few of their voices are getting heard to the degree that they should, which means work isn't getting supported to the degree that it should. It means brilliant solutions aren't being heard. It means that powerful, radical visions of a livable and just future are going unattended. And so we are hoping that this collection can be sort of one small contribution to trying to right that ship a bit.
So Katharine, I pointed out at the beginning here that when you look at the countries that have done comparatively better with this horrible pandemic, they're led by women. How do you see women bending the arc of this crisis into something that will work better for humanity?
It's been really interesting to see those gender threads play out this year. And I think part of that is about an ethic of care. It is about recognizing that we thrive together or we don't thrive at all, right? That we have to take care of one another to have a chance of getting through things like this. And those are some of the same themes that I think we see women bringing to climate leadership, a recognition that building community is a foundation to being able to build a better world, that we have to be centering issues of justice. Otherwise, we're going to end up deepening the injustices that currently exist. And that we have to attend to that relational quality between us, right? That those threads, kind of the weft and weave, which Ayanna told me was not a metaphor that people use very much in the 21st century, but it's the best one that I can think of. And I think that's, that's part of a feminist, womanist, matricultural approach to, to how we take care of our communities and build a society together.
Weft and weave, you tend to see women more often at the loom than you do see guys. Colette, what about this? What about this notion? What is it that women are bringing to this crisis that can really specially help us? Because actually, we're out of time. If you were to look and see, okay, maybe in 1990 we could just kind of do this in a casual way, back when the IPCC got started and the UNFCCC comes together, and President Bush even agrees to be part of it. But that was 30 years ago. Now we're, literally the water is washing up on you, whether you're down there in the Gulf Coast or here on the East Coast. So how do you see women making such an amazing difference now? Yeah. What are some of the ways? I mean, I don't expect you to list them all, but you may have some in mind.
I do, and thank you, and my deep appreciation to Katharine and Ayanna for their vision for putting these essays together, and even helping folks to bring this question up. I'm coming in from South Louisiana, and coming in from an area of the country that's experiencing climate impact now, has been for a really long time. I've been in this work for 15 years, since Katrina, and I think women being highlighted in this book is actually one of the more honest looks at what's actually happening on the ground. We're often invisibilized, but if you're here in the midst of disaster and you look across 3 states that have been ravaged by a disaster, you see women everywhere, checking on folks, checking on their neighbors, listening to stories, bringing information, bringing resources, always walking in with something in hand, always leaving with something to bring to somebody else. This is what women do. I think weaving is an appropriate analogy here. And I also think it's a truth being told by this book. And from where I sit, there's another role that women play. I come from the land of Southern mamas. And Southern mamas, I don't know about those Northeastern mamas, but the Southern mamas can talk with a tone. You know what I'm saying? They can give you that look, they can give you that tone, and you don't always have to say too much, but it's serious, right? It's serious. We're not talking about a 30-year trajectory. You better deal with it right now. And we've got a lot of women down here taking a tone around climate that a lot of people can hear. This is serious. This requires us all to get over ourselves every now and again and move together collectively so we can save everyone, or as many as we can. And we've got something really big that we have to deal with. I'll offer one last piece here, which is I think women are also the spiritual carriers, carrying not just religion, but spiritual tradition that connects to resistance and survival. And that's especially true here in the South.
That's really insightful. We could just stay on this, and I think we should stay on this, Jainey, and give you a crack at this as well. The delta that women offer in this crisis.
Sure, I'd be happy to continue the metaphor here and keep going with the question. And I also just want to express appreciation for this conversation and for the movement that this anthology has really sparked. It's really inspiring. I'm going to speak from the perspective of a policymaker. I know that's the perspective that has been assigned to me for this conversation. Although I do think all of us wear several hats. I currently, my role is to prepare New York City for the impacts of climate change. We are a city of 520 miles of coastline. That's more than Boston, Miami, Los Angeles, and San Francisco combined. We are expecting up to 2 feet of sea level rise by the middle of the century, and that number goes up to 6 feet by the end of the century. there is a lot of work to do to prepare not only for the impacts of flooding and coastal storms and sea level rise, but also for the other impacts that we face, flooding from extreme precipitation and extreme heat as well. Um, and it really requires us to weave, I'm going to continue the metaphor, a climate lens into everything that the city does. We really need to approach every decision that we make, every investment that we make with climate in mind. And I think that that is long-term organizational change that requires building capacity within institutions. It requires bringing a lot of people along and breaking down silos. And I think that women offer a leadership style that builds bridges, that it I think incites collaboration, and it really brings perspectives together. That is really conducive to the kind of change that we need to make in order to really rise to the challenge that climate change presents. So I think it's a type of leadership, a type of approach that I'm just building on the responses really that Colette and Catherine already provided, but maybe adapting them to the government context, because changing the way governments work is a kind of organizational change that I don't think we really have precedent for, and it's going to require an enormously collaborative style of leadership to actually make work.
Yeah, the transactional approach doesn't work so well, right? In a situation like this, to put it mildly. Susie, maybe you want to talk about the gender difference here, and in fact, how the cooperative approach versus the transactional one. Women seem a lot more comfortable doing things in a cooperative way.
Seems like that's how we get anything done. So first of all, thanks, Steve, and everyone here for having me and for setting up this forum for conversation. If we really could, I would rather we sit in a circle, and we're probably all overdue for a hug, doing the hard work that we all do. So this is second best, but I'll take it. I guess what just occurred to me when Colette and Jainey spoke was, so women out front one more time, right? And women behind as well. I want to say so many times the elected officials are the men, not entirely anymore, but if you look at Congress, if you look at any state legislature, if you look at, most mayors, it's still a very male dominated world. And if you look behind, who are the people who are supporting them? Who are doing all that engagement with the community? Who are doing all the planning? Who are doing all the, the actual hands-on support of the communities facing these issues? And I would say 70, 80% of that is women. And that's, so, we're doing most of the work, right? And as we're engaging with communities, we often face resistance. People are not happy with the messages we bring. It is really hard work to not only know what's coming with climate change, but then go into community and have to actually tell our people, the news is not good. This is what Colette was just saying. And oftentimes, women then get beat up for being those messengers of the bad news. So I guess my focus in this whole thing is, how do we support those who support all of us, who take care of us? That to me is, if we don't do that, and in fact, I've seen women now choosing to leave the field because in COVID, they are teachers, mothers, childcare providers, and financial providers for their families. And it's just a huge burden. We're not endlessly capable, but I just feel like, we have somehow an approach or a propensity, I guess, to notice that and then to start building the support networks around so that those who are doing all that work keep going. And to me, I don't see that being initiated by men. I don't know why, but that's what I'm observing. And I think we need it. The men need it too. They just might not be the ones starting that.
Well, we could go down deeper into this world of social psychology and the climate, and I think it will be worth our while, but we only have, less than an hour to have this discussion, but I think it might be really fruitful. However, and maybe we can come back to that, because I think this is a fascinating topic, really, the mindset um, that so many people in our society have about this, and where women are able to break through. Although I should remind everybody that, yes, women are really shouldering the burden on this and really speaking with important voices here. But throughout society, men or women, this is still a minority of folks who are really willing to look this thing right in the eye. And take the steps. So Jainey, I want to turn back to you for a moment, because your job is to confront this and figure out a way to get some more resilience built into New York City, and model for the rest of us. You said very optimistically, 6 feet by the end of the century. I think that's a very optimistic linear projection from a series of projections which, to me, have always seemed, that curve seems to have gone up in more of a geometric fashion than a linear fashion. And I would think that we're probably could be looking at 8 or even 10 feet by then, as things warm up and the feedback loops get going. But how do you build resilience, and infrastructure, so that the burden is not on communities? And New York is a big city, but it's also a collection of communities.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked that question. I really think the work of resilience is building resilient systems and resilient infrastructure, so that we're not expecting communities to bounce back after every disruption. I mean, we are coming off an intense season of unprecedented wildfires in the West, and the most Atlantic hurricanes we have ever seen on record. So,
Mhm.
I mean, these disruptions are fast and furious, and they are intensifying, they are coming more frequently. And the point's already been made that these climate events are disproportionately impacting the most vulnerable among us. And too often, I think the term resilience is um, used as an expectation that those communities can take the punches and pull themselves back up again. And I think we need to turn that expectation on its head. It's not about people bouncing back over and over again as they get beat down by extreme weather events. It's about building infrastructure and building systems to protect people, so that it is not the burden is not on the communities themselves, but on these systems that they depend on. Um, and I think that we also have to do this in a way that really um, considers quality of life and works to transform communities in a positive way. I mentioned that we have 520 miles of coastline, and sea level rise is a major challenge that we're working to address. One approach we could take in New York City is building walls, and we've heard a lot of talk about building walls over the last 4 years. And I think, at least in a conversation about climate change, I can safely say that we don't want to be building walls, right? And hopefully everyone will agree. That's not what this is about. Safety, of course, is a goal of our efforts as we're building resilience and adaptation projects. But we don't want to cut ourselves off from the waterfront. We want to continue to enjoy our waterfront recreation, our working waterfronts, our waterfront views. And these projects are expensive. Building massive coastal resilience projects takes a lot of work and a lot of money. Let's use those investments to also think about what else we need in communities, so that we're improving quality of life. One project I talk about in my essay, in All We Can Save, is the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project, which is a 2.5 mile long project along the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It's going to protect 110,000 people, 28,000 of whom live in public housing. We're building flood protection at the water's edge, but we're also revitalizing East River Park, which is such an important green space that the community relies on. One of the things we heard from the community is that there are lots of fields and tracks and courts in the park, but they're all fenced off, and they wanted interstitial spaces. They wanted spaces between those amenities to gather as families, to have picnics. We're making sure that that's something that we deliver to this community through the project. They also wanted better waterfront access. So we're reconstructing the pedestrian bridges that go over the FDR, if people are familiar with the east side of New York, into the East River Park, and making sure that they have universal access so people can go onto those bridges with wheelchairs or strollers and really come into an inviting space into the park. These are important things that the community really wanted, and you know, and furthermore, I just want to be clear: the flood protection at the waterfront will not be a wall that cuts off the access to the water, but rather a wall that's underground that no one sees. You know, I think these are like really important features that that allow us to maintain the character of a waterfront community, but also provide the community the amenities they were looking for.
Of course, this all costs money, Jainey, and I want to turn to Colette on this very subject of money, because you know, why don't you, Colette, just go ahead and tell us, you know, from your perspective, what you see as the root cause of the climate crisis.
Yes.
Why we are literally in over our heads. If Pat Bryant were here to say it, he would also say it. You know, tell the story.
Yeah, you know, in my essay, what I'm able to just articulate is really a 15-year arc on how I came to know what I know, and how I came to understand the climate crisis in relation to the other crises that we're facing in our community. And the truth of the matter is, if you trace it all back, if you trace it to its root cause, if you understand what's accelerating this human accelerated climate impact, you get to our economy, you get to capitalism, you get to extractive and exploitative practices that are rooted in a very dark past, one that folks don't want to talk about, one that folks don't want to admit sometimes, but one that we all...
Wait a second, Colette. Are you saying that an economy that used to buy and sell people is doing something wrong, buying and selling nature?
I'm trying to tell you that we could commodify humanity, that we could commodify this earth, that we can commodify the river, the tree, the water, and the land. This is all rooted in a philosophy of extraction and exploitation. This is the underbelly of our great society. And it's hard to talk about because we enjoy a level of privilege and wealth in this country that we really don't want to question. Even if we have to, if we could just acknowledge it, you know, every February, that's good enough. But we don't really want to question why we are as comfortable as we are. And this comfort, we really don't want to pay attention to the fact that the comfort that we're feeling every day, even some of the working class of us, is driving an emissions problem where the US is really one of the main culprits, the main culprit, if not, you know, one of the top three. And we have to have a conversation, not just about recycling and light bulbs and things, although we need to recycle and change our light bulbs. We have to have a conversation about an economy that's driving us to pay fossil fuel, big agriculture, coal companies, to pay people to destroy the planet we are needing to live on. Because this is a problem now. These massive profits of just 100 companies are really what we could be reinvesting in communities. I'm listening to seawalls that come up out of the ground. Yes, why not? Why don't we see big investments in these things as opposed to investments in the profit venture of 100 companies around the globe? This is going to require us to have a deep conversation, both about those companies that we like to villainize or that we're clear about, but also about our own spending and consuming habits. This is not just about those companies. This is about how we live our lives every day, not just as one person, but as a society. Why aren't we all on a local community-controlled renewable energy grid? Why aren't we making these changes that since Katrina 15 years ago, we've been saying that we need to make? This is the moment to make hard changes and hard shifts. And it's not just going to be, what innovation can we come up with to get us out of this problem? This is going to be re-indigenizing ourselves to an understanding of us as people inside of a broader ecosystem. And it's going to be us really looking at racialized capitalism and understanding how this philosophy of extraction and exploitation is only going to lead us to a terrible end if we don't shift it together. Now, this is going to bring us back to indigenous ways of trading, of living, of migrating. And these are all of the things we've taken the time to villainize over the last 2 generations, right? The people who cross borders are people we don't want. We need pay equity on the upscale, not just make sure everybody has what they need. I mean, these are the social conversations that we have to have. This is not just about what green jobs we can build. This is about how can we transform, not just shift, transform the way we live every day, transform our society, and begin that transformation with repair and restoration, which really gets everybody really nervous, right? If we start talking about reparations and restoration, people get very nervous because I think we have an understanding of what we owe the front lines. What we owe the front lines in this country, in the United States, and what we owe the front lines in the global South, who are literally having to move entire cities and countries because of the greenhouse gases that our privilege is putting into the air. This is going to be about equity. This is going to be about truth. And this is really going to be about courage.
So how do you navigate these waters, Colette? I mean, on the one hand, you're talking about the economic system, which I believe you're saying is broken, that it is a capital system that buys and sells people and nature and all that, or has in the past bought and sold people, still buying and selling nature, isn't working for us. And yet we're living with the benefits of this particular system, as you say. So to be blunt, if you when people stand up in this society and say, there's something wrong with capitalism, what's happening here, they're often marginalized. They're communists. They're not, that's not the American way. How do you bring people together to understand that, those labels aren't correct and that this is really such a key path forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think I used to think about this question differently 15 years ago. 15 years ago, I would have said, this is a problem, this is wrong, come on, y'all, let's change. But I've learned a concept called bottom-up organizing. And bottom-up organizing says people know their own conditions. And it is your job as a facilitator to facilitate their own articulation of their conditions, but you don't get to just go around telling people your conclusions. That is oppression. And I don't want to be a tool of oppression. I want to dismantle oppression. And so oftentimes bottom-up organizing, it is slow, but it requires people to just ask very basic questions. Do you have what you need? If you didn't have to work every day in that job, would you have what you need? Do you want to work every day? Should we have to work? Is our labor being used in the best ways? I heard comments about people with children and COVID. I mean, look at what labor really is, and who has access to high incomes and things like that. These are questions you just get to ask. And I'll tell you, my Trump voting neighbors across the street, my friends who don't know what I do, my family who couldn't tell you, why I stick to this climate stuff. They'll all tell you their own conditions and they will all get to the same conclusion. It just takes a second. It's not hard for people to acknowledge that the current economic system is only working for a very few people. Even the people who are okay aren't really okay, especially in the climate crisis. That'll challenge all of the middle class solid ground you think you're standing on. You need one hurricane to make you feel unstable. And so we can ask questions about our economy, and we can also ask questions about our society. And what is it that everyone in our society should have, no matter what, no matter their nationality, no matter their language, no matter their ability, what are the things that people should have? And we establish a level of humanity back into this conversation, which has been taken out for profit. in the hopes that we will all one day make a big profit. But it's not working out like that. So I simply ask folks about their own conditions, because the conditions are so terrible here in the Gulf South and throughout this country for so many people, that if you just ask people to take a minute and tell the truth, they'll get to the conclusion. We don't have to say communism. I'm not a communist. I'm saying racialized capitalism doesn't work. I haven't seen capitalism in its truest form work because I've never seen it applied before. Maybe it can, maybe it can't. I'm just saying there's a problem here, and it starts in our economic system, and we got to be honest about that.
Thank you for that insight. So Katharine, this book, All We Can Say of Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis, is, well, it's a wonderful teaching tool. It's a wonderful organizing tool. And if the one thing I came away from the introduction that you and Ayanna, and also your conclusion, that the two of you wrote is that the way through this mess is through getting together as communities to really invest in relational strength in a movement that is building. It's coming a lot faster. When I started living on Earth 30 years ago, 14% of the public cared about climate disruption. Now there's a majority that in a very light way care about it. 14% probably are still, that's probably the number of folks who are willing to look at what's really required, but still things have really moved. But how do you build this movement so that in fact we can take action in a reasonably timely way?
Yeah. I just want to say thank you to Colette for articulating those dynamics so well. I think so often we get caught up in talking about climate change as the problem, when actually climate change is just the most damning feedback we've got about the problem. And I think when you're talking about asking questions, doing that deeper listening, like people are hearing the other feedback, right? Of mass inequality, of chronic loneliness and meaninglessness, racial violence, other things that tell us, oh yeah, we've got a root cause problem in the economy. And I so appreciate that focus on good questions and listening, because I think, Steve, so much of that is the answer to your question about the climate movement, which I think historically has not been very good at generous questions or deep listening. It's been really good at like facting at people, and finger wagging and giving them 10 things that they need to do tomorrow, or else they're bad humans. And we've got to get, it has not really been a party you want to go to, even when it's the party that you've chosen, right? And I think that has been especially true for Indigenous folks, people of color, women, right? It hasn't felt like a very welcoming space. And so one of the things that Ayanna and I really wanted to try to do in the book was to create a sense of an invitation and a welcoming in, and not this this topic that's the domain of experts and you've got to have 3 PhDs and a speechwriter before you can step into this conversation. That no, we are human on Earth in this moment, and that means we are part of this conversation, and we are in this work necessarily together. And we've also tried to use the book as kind of a catalyst for doing more of that also. I was really excited to hear Rebecca say that she's going to be leading an All We Can Save circle in the new year, because we hear from people, Ayanna and I kept hearing from people, just their hunger for deeper dialogue, for getting into circle, for having a space to talk about the emotional and spiritual dimensions of this issue, to think creatively together about how they can contribute, how they could link arms. And each of the voices in this book, the 41 essays, the 17 poems, and then original art by Madeline Jubilee Saito, they all kind of offer different entry points, right? Different ways of of contributing. And we hope that that may be some sort of generative material for folks. So the circles they're just a 10 session sequence, maybe once a week for 10 weeks, engaging with each section of the book with 3 generous questions, and just seeing if we can create more space and take the time that is needed to create that relational strength that we need, really as a movement that I think other movements for social change have been more attuned to and more adept at historically. And it's high time for more of that in the climate space.
So, Katharine, you a while back approached this space through the Drawdown Project, if I have that correct, which has largely technical solutions to this. So, I guess Paul Hawken is involved in that project, some really inspiring people. But out of that close look at the many, many ways that we could save ourselves with technology that doesn't even have to be invented, I guess what happened? Did you notice that we're not making those choices and you thought that maybe something else would be is in order? Or tell me.
Yeah, I mean, look, we need solutions, right? We need a toolbox. We need better sources of electricity. We need different means of growing our food, right? All of these are important pieces of the puzzle, but they are not the whole puzzle. And we do have an incredible toolbox of solutions because humans have been busy creating them or remembering them, as the case may be, right? In some instances. But to bring those solutions to fruition at the speed and the scale that is required is going to demand that we go way beyond what the solutions are to how we use them together. And that's about culture, that's about power, that's about storytelling, that's about who has money, right? And that's about how decisions get made. All of those things are, frankly, much more complicated and much more necessary in a lot of ways. And for me, I've always been really interested in the stories that we tell about ourselves and this planet that we call home and our responsibility to it and to one another, or lack thereof, and what that means for what we do or don't do in the world. And I was interested in Drawdown. I joined the team to do the bulk of writing that original book because it was in the sum of its parts telling a different story about humanity, that we're not just terrible, horrible, no good, very bad, greedy, lazy, incompetent, and all the rest. And we are those things, right? Sometimes, but that's not all that we are. And I think we have to tell that other story. And Kendra Pierre-Lewis actually has a wonderful essay in All We Can Save called Wakanda Doesn't Have Suburbs, which is about the dearth of these good stories about a future that we do want, right? We've got lots of popular cultural, creative about apocalypse, right? And disaster ahead. But we have very few, in this case, she's looking mostly at film and TV, very few instances of a world that we do want to try to build together or might want to. And she points to Black Panther as kind of one of the, sort of the Lone Rangers in that. So anyway, that was sort of a winding, winding response.
No, it's very important. And so, as I said earlier, I wish we could kind of go all night. But I want to throw something for consideration out to you folks. Something we've been working on here, Living on Earth, with the election. We've done a series of segments with the Environmental Voter Project because, well, when I first encountered it, I was astonished at the numbers that they had. And that is, the folks in this country, registered voters who are most likely to put the environment and climate number one in their preferences are Black, brown, young, and make less than $50,000 a year. Now, there's a lot of nuance that Nathaniel Stinnett will point out about that research, but that's the top line. Now, at the same time, by the way, those registered voters historically have gotten out less. The turnout is less than the population as a whole. So that particular project really pushed hard. And in Georgia, they say that they got 69,000 of those people put the environment number one to vote in the presidential election. Who knows what will happen in the upcoming senatorial runoffs? But what do you make of this notion that the folks perhaps the most ripe for the picking of really joining into building a large community around climate action, or building a larger community around climate action, are Black, brown, young, and don't take in more than 50K a year? I'll take a volunteer to start. Who would like? This is the first hand that I see here. Oh, they're also polite. Oh, there we go. There's Susan.
I'm happy to start, but I'm sure you all can add. I mean, first of all, this group that you just described is the most vulnerable to climate change. That's the number one, they're seeing it, they're living the impacts right now. They're not protected. They don't have privilege to buffer them from the impacts. And secondly, we've disenfranchised that very group the most. So between those two factors, you get exactly those numbers. People who are ready to vote on it, see the urgency of it, and yet, feel like, well, what's my vote going to make a difference on? They don't, right? So the task really is, to show them that their vote does make a difference and that they can change things. I mean, if, we keep talking here this whole evening about the policies and practices, resource flows, that's like the symptoms of what we're suffering from, if you will. Underneath that are the relations and the power issues that Katharine just mentioned. Who is at the table? If we don't have the right people at the table, those resource flows are not going to change. We're not going to get the money for the seawalls. We're going to have the money go into fossil fuel projects. I mean, that's just the logic of self-interest and power. And underneath that, of course, is how are we thinking about this entire problem? This is why I appreciate this project so much, because it really questions how we think and then who gets to say anything about it, right? This whole thing, this conversation this evening started with whose voices are we not hearing? They're not at the table. Therefore, we have the same approaches to the solutions, technical, technocratic, as before. And what we're talking about is multi-solving. This is how my friend Beth Sawin calls it, right? We have to address these issues in the complexity in which we actually live. So
yeah, so how can you draw this? I was obviously voting is one thing, but how do you draw this this cohort of folks who really have this in mind? How do you draw them into this wider community that you folks are building with this project? How do you draw them in?
You should all, Colette, you're doing it every day. Tell us.
We're doing it every day. You got to start with a good gumbo. That's the first thing you got to do. You got to, I mean, you have to meet people where they are. And you have to understand that your degrees, your privilege, your money, your access have all been designed for you. And at best, you're an exception to a broken system. And you cannot allow what you've been taught about your ranking in society right now to actually permeate your mind. We are all humans and we are all equal to each other. And there is no room for any conversation around that. Right now, we have a system that values people differently. We have a system that values people according to race, according to gender. And when you get down to someone with my skin color and my gender, I'm at the bottom of the list. And so I have to rail against that kind of system. That system does not benefit me. And it turns out that if I'm at the bottom and I'm railing against it, we fix it we fix it for everyone. And this is the buy-in that has to happen, because the truth of the matter is that there are poor white people who feel the brakes in this system. There are gender non-conforming folks who feel the brakes of this system. There are folks in prison, and we talked about voter disenfranchisement. There's disenfranchisement that leads people not to vote. And then there's disenfranchisement that stops people from voting. Here in the South, let me be clear, the latter is true and effective. All of the millions of people in Florida who are about to get their voting rights reinstated, who have just come back from a prison system that we know targets them because of their skin, they can't vote. There are thousands of people across the South who cannot vote because they are a victim of a system that looks at the color of their skin. And so if and this is what I say to my liberal, wonderful white environmentalist friends, if you wanna win this climate fight, it's time to get in the racial justice training, racial justice fight. It's time to get in the criminal justice fight. All of this, you don't wanna talk about defund, you don't wanna talk about all this because you get real nervous, then you don't wanna solve this climate crisis. If you want to solve this planet, the problem for this planet, if you wanna keep us here, then you have to see how these things feed into each other. You have to meet people where they are, and we have to start by valuing everybody the same. There's no room for any compromise there.
So Catherine, as you edit this follow-up volume, I think her essay is going to be called "Start with a Good Gumbo."
I like it. Heather McTiertoni has her essay, "Collards are just as good as kale." So start with a good gumbo feels like a nice pairing with that.
Yeah, and although maybe a ham hock in kale might improve it, that could do the trick,
That's been the issue with kale all along.
So
As long
Jainey,
as it's locally sourced ham hock.
Yeah, exactly. But
Do we need a shout out for the vegetarians here? Come on.
I know I'm a Southern vegetarian, which is it's sort of a hard row to hoe. But Steve, to your point, I think Georgia. I'm here in Atlanta, which is home. Georgia is a really good example of how this dynamic shifts, right? And there's a dialectic between good organizing, right? Just the day-to-day hard grassroots work, and also having candidates that people want to show up to vote for, right? Because there have been lots of instances where I have cared about climate, but there hasn't been a climate candidate on the ballot, right? And so I think that's part of it as well. And the organizing starts to create climate candidates. I'm not sure we would have called Joe Biden a climate candidate a year before the presidential election, but Sunrise Movement, lots of, youth organizers and others pushed and pushed and pushed, right? Then you've also got good science pushing, saying, look, the bar's got to be here, not down here. You've got solutions that are at the table that can actually realize that bar. So all of these things start to, I think, work together. And I think we can increasingly kind of create the candidates that actually get folks excited to turn out and be engaged.
and if lest folks forget, the secret sauce of the Sunrise movement is the double X chromosome. I mean, women really pulled that together and understood that, you had to sit in at Nancy Pelosi's office to be taken seriously. Otherwise, it would just be more of the same. Jainey, if you have more time to be with us, it would be great if you wanted to weigh in on this before you have to go. Oh, she's back. Okay. Were you able to hear me okay? Jainey, were you able to hear me?
No, I clearly had a technical problem. This
Yeah.
is
Okay.
a challenge of COVID life, I guess. No, I did not hear your question.
Oh, so the question is, hey, before you go, because I saw your screen, do you want to weigh in on this? This notion of, well, actually reflect on any of the things that we said, because we are starting to run into the clock here. We'll take a couple of questions before we go, but I wanted you to weigh in before we do go to the questions.
Sure. I mean, I couldn't agree more with everything that's been said. I think the importance of acknowledging everyone's humanity is so crucial to to uh, engaging people on climate and finding solutions that actually work for people. So I think, that's where I would start. But I also just really agree with the intersectionality of climate change and all the other issues we face as a society. Like we often have conversations where people will push the city on things like, why aren't you just moving to a risk-based flood insurance system where we're raising the premiums for everyone who live in risky areas to disincentivize living there? Well, that would create that would lead very quickly to a foreclosure crisis, right? I mean, we have to see the intersectionality between our affordable housing crisis and our climate crisis, the racial justice challenges we're facing in our cities and really across the country, and what that means for what that means for the increasing impacts of climate change and how that's only going to deepen the disparities that we face. So I think we really have to acknowledge the intersectionalities, because that's how you then actually meet people where they're at. That's how you start talking about the things that matter to people on a day-to-day basis. Otherwise, often climate change can seem far off and distant and something that doesn't affect people in the present. I think once you start making those connections, it changes the entire conversation.
Indeed. Let me see if we have some questions that have come in. So here's one. And I'm not sure what the voice is. Oh, this is identified as being from somebody named Maureen. So thank you, Maureen. My firm belief is that organizing household by household, neighborhood by neighborhood for climate is going to be the key. Closer community help residents survive through Sandy. In California, we have the most fire-wise communities in the country. And this is also a jump ball question. Do you believe this is the way we get people to pay attention to the big lift we need to do together? Who would like to take this one?
I'm happy
Right.
to start here. I think that it's been really unfortunate that we have called what we're doing to respond to this pandemic social distancing. I really wish that we called it physical distancing, because I think that social connections are more important than ever. And I'm talking about this in the context of the pandemic, but applies to climate change as well. Social cohesion is absolutely critical to ensuring that we weather through crises and do it as a community. We know that after Sandy, houses of worship, community-based organizations, they were the first responders. They were the groups that were knocking on doors, making sure people were okay, making sure people had the first aid they needed. And we've seen this time and time again after disasters in every part of the country and the world. So I absolutely think social cohesion is an ingredient in fighting the climate crisis, an ingredient that we need to pay really close attention to. I don't think it's the only ingredient, but it's an important one for sure.
Yeah,
Can I,
go ahead. Yes, please.
can I just add one word? I think we probably, as organizers at various levels, might have disagreement on where to start, or whether from the bottom up only is the way to go. I've worked in climate now for 25 plus years, and I have to say we don't have the time to wait for, it all to come from one direction. We put all all our bread in one basket, when we were thinking about the leaders at the top will solve it. And that didn't work. And then we were looking at, everything coming from the bottom up. And quite frankly, we need it everywhere. It's just a matter of who is in these leadership positions wherever they are, and whose voices get heard there. So in the Obama administration, we're all right now working really hard to get good people in. If we're just having the same old people, we're going to get the same old solutions. And that needs to be coordinated with what comes from the bottom up. And it needs to, actually be responsive to that. I totally believe that, there are way more creative solutions coming from the margins. They typically come from the bottom up. They do not come from the establishment. That's just the nature of how transformation works. But we can't wait until that somehow miraculously bubbles up, until, people who are at the top who work in a totally different direction come around. We need every level, every sector at the table.
I have this vision that like every CEO of a public company should be paired with a youth activist that they basically have to have at their side all the time for every decision. Like how do we bring folks in laterally and infuse them into what is frankly deeply defunct decision making in so many spaces today? I don't know. I think we've got to think about how to sort of kind of crack the status quo open, as you're saying, Susie, because it's not gonna solve it itself.
On the left-hand side, a youth, and on the right-hand side, an elder, a grandmother. How's that?
There you go.
I love that.
Hey, so Catherine, is Kendra Pierre-Louis going to write this utopian vision that she says is missing? Because, what's the saying? It's easier to attract people to honey than it is to get them to eat their peas.
Well, she's working with Ayana on how to save a planet. So they've put their stake in the ground on telling stories about what we can do and where we can go together. And I think critically also they're trying to help folks understand opportunities for engagement, right? Because I think there are a lot of people on the sidelines who want to help in some way, but they're not sure how to help. And maybe no one has reached out a hand to say, come on, we need you, and we'll kind of show you the ropes. And, if you think about any effort you've ever stepped into a new space, it's usually because someone has welcomed you in somehow. So I think, more of that across the board. And I certainly hope Kendra's got some kind of magnum opus up her sleeve in addition to that awesome podcast.
We'll go to this, I guess, is our last question, unless my producers say we should go on, but I think we're coming up to time. Comes from Elena, who says, yes, after the fires in Oregon, my friends tended and befriended by setting up food and services for free. I appreciate you pointing that out. How to make people understand that this is leadership? Most seem to just take for granted that women will be the ones to fix things.
I'd like to talk on this one, Steve. That's actually how I started in this work. And I am a woman, and I did think to fix things. But I had a lot of learning to do. And sometimes that learning comes with showing up for people, not because you can do something for them, but because sometimes they have a gem and a jewel for you, oftentimes wisdom. I remember right after Katrina going around in my neighborhood and watching these Black women planting sunflowers. And I'd never really seen sunflowers in our neighborhood before, not in a big way. But it turns out they knew to plant sunflowers and greens because they pull out the toxins from the flooded soil naturally. And I didn't know that. I don't know what I was doing, playing ball or something, but now I know. And here I was thinking that I'm, bringing somebody some good legal advice, but really what they taught me was what I need to do to have my own safe food. And so sometimes that leadership is about you being a leader because you're doing something. And sometimes the leadership is because you've learned that leaders must constantly learn. And I just want to agree with Susie's point earlier about the folks at the top. I agree. We've got to start moving in all directions on this thing. So we absolutely need the neighborhood by neighborhood work. We're going to need that for survival. But if we're talking about change and transformation, the way to get people to understand their role in this heavy lift is to hold our leaders to another standard. Joe Biden is not a climate president. Let's be clear. This is going to be a hard fight. But he is an experienced politician. So let's see where we get to. Maybe something can happen. But we've got a bigger issue here, which is we have corporate actors and a government that supports them. And we have to have not just leadership who will come in and challenge it, but we have to have an engaged population that will hold leaders to that other status. This means we have to understand democracy in a totally different way. Right now, our country understands democracy as something you do every 4 years. one button at a time, right, on a screen,
Mhm.
as opposed to understanding that democracy is something that we have to manage and we have to nourish and we have to help to grow and build and go forward. And it's a lifelong dedication to the potential of this nation that we really need to get folks connected into.
Well said. And we are up to the time here. So we're going to wrap it up here. I want to thank all of our contributors here, Rebecca and David, of course, from our institution at UMass Boston, and Katharine Wilkinson and Colette Pichon Battle. Did I say that right? Pichon or Pichon? Pichon. Okay. Susanne Moser.
Pichon, you got it.
Pichon. Okay. Like the Bayou Pichon, huh? Okay. And Jainey Bavishi, and of course the Sustainable Solutions Lab at UMass Boston, in the McCormick School, and the Security and Sustainability Forum, excuse me, made all this possible. And for those of you who joined us, thank you so much. And if you enjoyed this event, please consider supporting what we do here at Living on Earth. There's a place to donate on our website, loe.org. And just by way of mention, to say that over these last 3 decades, we've offered listeners the latest coverage of climate change, ecology, human health, and human interest stories every week. And so if you missed Giving Tuesday, hey, there's still a chance. And this is a perfect opportunity to help us offer listeners some of the accurate, engaging, and in-depth things that we do here. We are a listener-supported show, and your contribution will make an impact, whether it's $5 or $5 million. Take your pick. Every little bit helps. So we would like to invite you also to send us a comment about what you think you heard, or what you liked or didn't like about what you heard tonight. It's there on the webpage, but also comments at loe.org. We'll also accept a comment. And if you have suggestions about topics we should cover, books that we should bring into the book club, people we should talk to, please tell us, because that's how it works in this business. We hear about something from somebody and they tell us about somebody else. And that's how we got to you folks. And hopefully this is how we'll get to the wider circle. So again, let me thank you all for participating in all of this, and have a good evening.